Hello, I am Ch23 and I will discuss about production. Before we start, let's start talking about grounded theory. This theory is the aim to generate or discover a theory, or it may be also defined as the discovery of theory from data systematically obtained from social research. Let's start with a brief history of mass media and culture. Until Johannes Gutenberg's 15th century invention of the movable type printing press, books were painstakingly handwritten, and no two copies were exactly the same. The printing press made the mass production of print media possible. Not only was it much cheaper to produce written material, but new transportation technologies also made it easier for text to reach a wide audience. It's hard to overstate the importance of Gutenberg's invention, which helped usher in massive cultural movements like the European Renaissance and the Protestant Reformation. In 1810, another German printer, Friedrich Koenig, pushed media production even further when he essentially hooked the steam engine up to a printing press, enabling the industrialization of printed media. In 1800s, a hand-operated printing press could produce about 480 pages per hour. Koenig's machine more than doubled this rate. As the first Europeans settled the land that would come to be called the United States of America, the newspaper was an essential medium. At first, newspapers helped the Europeans stay connected with events back home. But as the people developed their own way of life, their own culture, newspapers helped them give expression to that culture. Political scientist Benedict Anderson has argued that newspapers also help forge a sense of national identity by treating readers across the country as part of one unified group with common goals and values. Newspapers, he said, help create an imagined community. The United States continued to develop, and the newspaper was the perfect medium for the increasingly urbanized Americans of the 19th century who could no longer get their local news merely through gossip and word of mouth. These Americans were living in an unfamiliar world, and newspapers and other publications helped them negotiate the rapidly changing world. The Industrial Revolution meant that people had more leisure time and more money, and media helped them figure out how to spend both. In the early decades of the 20th century, the first major non-print forms of mass media, film and radio, exploded in popularity. Radios, which were less expensive than telephones and widely available by the 1920s, especially had the unprecedented ability of allowing huge numbers of people to listen to the same event at the same time. In 1924, President Calvin Coolidge's pre-election speech reached more than 20 million people. Radio was a boon for advertisers who now had access to a large and captive audience. The post-World War II era in the United States was marked by prosperity and by the introduction of seductive new form of mass communication, television. In 1946, there were about 17,000 televisions in the entire United States. Within 7 years, 2/3 of American households owned at least one set. As the United States gross national product, or which is GNP, doubled in the 1950s and again in the 1960s, the American home became firmly ensconced as a consumer unit. Along with the television, the typical U.S. family owned a car and a house in the suburbs, all of which contributed to the nation's thriving consumer-based economy. Broadcast television was the dominant form of mass media. There were just 3 major networks, and they controlled over 90% of the news programs, live events, and sitcoms viewed by Americans. Broadcast technology, including radio and television, has such a hold of the American imagination that newspapers and other print media found themselves having to adapt to the new media landscape. Print media was more durable and easily archived, and allowed users more flexibility in terms of time. Once a person had purchased a magazine, he could read it whenever and wherever he'd like. Broadcast media, in contrast, usually aired programs on a flex schedule, which allowed it to both provide a sense of immediacy but also impermanence until the advent of digital video recorders in the 21st century. It was impossible to pause and rewind a television broadcast. Next, we'll talk about technological transitions shape media industries. New media technologies both spring from and cause cultural change. For this reason, it can be difficult to neatly sort the evolution of media into clear causes and effects. Did radio fuel the consumerist boom of the 1920s, or did the radio become widely popular because it appealed to a society that was already exploring consumerist tendencies? Probably a little bit of both. Technological innovations such as the steam engine, electricity, wireless communication, and the internet have all had lasting and significant effects on American culture. Electricity altered the way people thought about time, since work and play were no longer dependent on the daily rhythms of sunrise and sunset. Wireless communication collapsed distance. The internet revolutionized the way we store and retrieve information. The contemporary media age can trace its origins back to the electrical telegraph, patented in the United States by Samuel Morse in 1837. Thanks to the telegraph, communications was no longer linked to the physical transportation of messages. Suddenly, it didn't matter whether a message needed to travel 5 or 500 miles. Suddenly, information from distant places was nearly as accessible as local news. When the first transaction cable was laid in 1858, allowing near instantaneous communication from the United States to Europe, the London Times described it as the greatest discovery since that of Columbus, a vast enlargement given to the sphere of human activity. Not long after the telegraph, wireless communication, which eventually led to the development of radio, television, and other broadcast media, emerged as an extension of telegraph technology. Although many 19th century inventors, including Nikola Tesla, had a hand in early wireless experiments, it was Italian-born Guglielmo Marconi who is recognized as the developer of the first practical wireless radio system. This mysterious invention, where sounds seemed to magically travel through the air, captured the world's imagination. Early radio was used for military communication, but soon the technology entered the home. The 19th century development of photographic technologies would lead to the later innovations of cinema and television. As with wireless technology, several inventors independently came out with photography at the same time, among them the French inventors Joseph Niepce and Louis Daguerre and British scientist William Henry Fox Talbot. In the United States, George Eastman developed the Kodak camera in 1888, banking on the hope that Americans would welcome an inexpensive, easy-to-use camera into their homes as they had with the radio and telephone. Moving pictures were first seen around the turn of the century, with the first U.S. projection hall opening in Pittsburgh in 1905. By the 1920s, Hollywood had already created its first stars, most notably Charlie Chaplin. By the end of the 1930s, Americans were watching the color films with full sound, including Gone with the Wind and The Wizard of Oz. Television, which consists of an image being converted to electrical impulses, transmitted through wires or radio waves, and then reconverted into images, existed before World War II, but really began to take off in the 1950s. In 1947, there were 178,000 television sets made in the United States. 5 years later, there were 50 million. Radio, cinema, and live theater all saw a decline in the face of this new medium that allowed viewers to be entertained without sound and moving pictures without having to leave their homes. For the last stage in this vast history of media technology, how's this for a prediction? In 1969, management consultant Peter Drucker predicted that the next major technological innovation after television will be an electronic appliance that will be capable of being plugged in wherever there is electricity and giving immediate access to all the information needed for schoolwork from first grade through college. He said it will be the equivalent of Edison's light bulb in its ability to revolutionize how we live. He had, in effect, predicted the computer. Why media? What do media do for us? Even a brief history of media can leave one breathless. The speed, reach, and power of the technological are humbling. The evolution can seem almost natural and inevitable, but it is important to stop and ask a basic question. Why? Why do media seem to play such an important role in our lives and our culture? With reflection, we can see that media fulfills several basic roles. First, one obvious role is entertainment. Media can act as a springboard of our imaginations, a source of fantasy, and an outlet of escapism. Next, media can also provide information and education. Information can come in many forms and often blurs the line with entertainment. Today, newspapers and news-oriented television and radio programs make available stories from across the globe, allowing readers or viewers in London to have access to voices and videos from China, Tokyo, or other countries. Another useful aspect of media is its ability to act as a public forum of the discussion of important issues. In newspapers or other periodicals, letters to the editor allows readers to respond to journalists or voice their opinions on the issues of today. Media can also serve to monitor government, business, and other institutions. Thinking more deeply, we can recognize that certain media are better at certain roles. Media have characteristics that influence how we use them. While some forms of mass media are better suited to entertainment, others make more sense as a venue for spreading information. For example, in terms of print media, books are durable and able to contain lots of information, but are relatively slow and expensive to produce. In contrast, newspapers are comparatively cheaper and quick to create, making them a better medium for the quick turnover of daily news. Television provides vastly more visual information than radio and is more dynamic than a static printed page. As mentioned at the start of this chapter, the 1960s media theorist Marshall McLuhan took these ideas one step further with the phrase, "The medium is the message." McLuhan emphasized that each medium delivers information in a different way and that content is fundamentally shaped by the medium. For example, although television news has the advantage of offering video and live coverage, making our stories come vividly alive, it is also a faster-paced medium. That means stories get reported in different ways than print. A story told on a television will often be more visual, have less information, and be able to offer less history and context than the same story coverage in a monthly magazine. We do not have to cast value in judgments but can affirm. people who get the majority of the news from a particular medium will have a particular view of the world shaped not just by the content of what they put or what they watch, but also by its medium. Or, as computer scientist Alan Kay put it, each medium has a special way of representing ideas that emphasize particular ways of thinking and de-emphasize others. If indeed the medium is message, the internet provides us with an extremely interesting message to consider. In conclusion, Gutenberg's invention of the printing press enabled the mass production of media, which was industrialized by Friedrich Koenig in the early 1800s. These innovations enabled the daily newspaper, which united the urbanized, industrialized population of the 19th century. In the 20th century, radio allowed advertisers to reach a mass audience and helped spur the consumerism of the 1920s and the Great Depression of the 1930s. After World War II, television boomed in the United States and abroad, though its concentration in the hands of three major networks led to accusations of conformity. The spread of the cable and subsequent deregulation in the 1980s and 1990s led to more channels, but not necessarily more diverse ownership. Also, technological transitions have also had great effect on the media industry, although it is difficult to say whether technology caused a cultural shift or rather resulted from it. The ability to make technology small and affordable enough to fit into the home is an important aspect as a popularization of new technologies. Media fulfill several roles in culture, including the following. First, entertainment and providing an outlet for the imagination. Second, educating and informing. Third, serving as a public forum for the discussion of important issues. And last, acting as a watchdog for government, business, and other institutions. Thank you for listening.